No Harry Potter movie is
And
good.
you're like, give me the Snyder Cut. Oh, sorry, just walk in front of you here. Gonna put my popcorn down. Oh, sorry, gotta put this here.
Universal needs to sue Sony.
Hey, I'm an idiot. I was fired from Fox. Let me go.
I'd like actually to see Venom just crush Spider-Man.
Hello everyone. So we just recently got some news, or well, recently as in multiple hours ago, possibly even 12 hours ago, and maybe even more from when I'm recording this, but I don't even care at this point. We got news. There was a pretty big shakeup in Marvel Studios. Now this was initially going to be covering some other stuff too, but now it's just about that shakeup because there's a lot, and there really is a lot involved in this. And so I wanted to just kind of give my thoughts because, clearly you care about my thoughts, which I deeply appreciate. So, without further ado, my thoughts on this thing. So I don't remember who broke it first, but the holy trinity of media reporting, the Hollywood Reporter, Variety, and Deadline, I think that was a trio, all reported at some point or another within like 3 minutes of each other, acting like it's a news story, because I guess that's how it works. That Victoria Alonso of Marvel Studios has left, or they parted ways, which is corporate America speak for she was fired, and she didn't, and it was kind of mutual. You're fired, I accept my firing type of thing. But parting ways is the diplomatic way to say we fired. Typically, you don't fire someone and then, typically if someone quits, it's not a mutual parting of ways. Typically, it's only if they're fired. If they quit, it's that they, there's other words, either they left or, they've moved on, or typically they'll quit to another opportunity. They've now gone to whatever. But anyway, not the point, because she was fired. Now, everyone was kind of crazy. Now, I'm sure if you're listening to this and you don't know who she is, go watch, any Marvel MCU thing and then go to the credits. One of the first names is hers. Her official title has something to do with post-production and VFX, and she was kind of in charge of that side of Marvel, but she technically was like Kevin Feige's right-hand woman in everything Marvel related, or at least was from Iron Man until now, I guess, because she's gone. Now everyone was taken by surprise by this, and then some of the reports started coming out, and I think the biggest thing to talk about is why, because this is a very weird shakeup, you would think, and maybe you wouldn't think, because Marvel has actually been failing spectacularly since over the last few months, apparently. I don't understand why, but that's a whole nother discussion which we're not going to get into. But anyways, apparently everyone thinks they're failing spectacularly. I think they think so too. Now, the one thing I want to talk about, because I think there's a narrative issue with the way she's being talked about. Okay, this is the thing. Now, I've never met her. I'm sure she's a great person. I don't think that character assassination is the way in which to look at this. Now, you could do that, but that seems like a very dick move, and so just don't do that. Because, you could just be a nice person. Now, the other thing I don't think we should take away from this is, she was the as a gay advocate, as a gay person and a woman of color, she was an advocate for. She was advocating constantly about how Marvel Studios and everyone else needs to, find. It needs to represent everyone. There needs to be diversity and inclusion in all of the movies, and there has to be this. And her reasoning, by the way, for this, because there will be those people who jump up and say, well, Marvel is too diverse, or whatever the fuck they want to say, which is all wrong. This is the thing. She advocated for diversity in a way of she literally said, and I'm gonna not actually, I don't have to actually have the quote, I wish I did, but, the summary of her quote was basically, we need to represent these people because they're huge demographics, which will just go elsewhere and find. Eventually, someone's going to figure this out, and we want to be the first ones to figure it out because they're going to go off and find their movies, and that's like 50% of the population. right, that are female, or there's the X amount of population that's Hispanic or whatever, right? And if we don't represent everybody, then they'll just go find someone that does, and we want to make that money. So it wasn't even like it was like this preachy thing. It was more of a practical, we want to make a lot of money thing. So I think that's something which I think should not also be forgotten, because I've already seen, and it's really disappointing and disgusting, frankly, that I've already seen the narrative of Marvel is fighting back against representation because of something. Look, it's Marvel's not active. Like her firing and what she did while she was at Marvel, they're two different things. Actually, we'll talk a little more about her firing, but like I think it needs to just be remembered. Just because someone advocates for something like, let's say, inclusion and diversity, Marvel firing them is not them saying we're taking a stand against inclusion and diversity, just saying there were other reasons which we had to fire this person, as much as we probably would have liked to keep them around, and we don't, they're not just saying, oh, well, we're like, we gotta just stop taking one part of what someone did and saying that is the reason they're fired. There's probably a whole lot of reasons. I'm sure it's more complex than even we will understand, again, for the time being. But, that's just how it is right now. And so we have to understand that, we can appreciate, obviously, what she did. And I also don't think we should take it lightly that they did choose, of all people, of visible minority woman, of gay woman to fire. I mean, there's all of that involved. And I'm sure this was not a decision they took lightly. At least I'm hoping it wasn't, because it shouldn't be. And hopefully this is something where it was, and I'll kind of lay out the situation and we'll kind of talk about why I think she was the person who had to get fired. Again, unfortunately, because I never want anyone to get fired. But if you have to make a statement and you need to show some level of commitment to doing better, then sometimes there are casualties in that, and sometimes it has to be, she kind of got scapegoated, as I'll get into in like literally a minute. Or now, I guess. So why was she really fired if it wasn't for her, unwavering support for diversity, and which it obviously, again, was not. I don't know how to make this more clear, obviously clear. Of course she didn't get fired because she advocated for diversity, and Marvel's not pushing back against inclusion because they fired her, okay? Let's all chill. Or not all, but like the people who are suggesting such disgusting things. Just chill. Anyways, why did she actually get fired is the question that's on everyone's mind now. And I'm going to give you the answer to this exact question. So the answer to this question is probably, because we don't know for sure, related to the whole dissatisfaction with the VFX stuff, which has been kind of going on and off. And so I want to take you to a report which is posted on from The Vulture, which is not the Spider-Man villain, but is instead a relatively reputable entertainment news source. And it came 2 months ago. And and I'm going to read part of a quote, and I don't even remember who wrote this. Their name was in my mind, and now it's not, so I apologize. The link to the article's in the description. So I'm sorry about that. But, quote, the main one that everyone's quite scared of is Victoria Alonso. She says a Vancouver-based tech who says a Vancouver-based tech who has vowed to never work for the studio again. She is known in the industry as a kingmaker. If she likes you, you're going to get work and move up in the industry. If you've pissed her off in any way, you're going to get frozen out. A senior animator who works for Marvel Studios Animation says that the in-house studio suffers under its own impossible deadline structure and pixel fucking style of dysfunction. We're in-house, we're paid well. I do feel like we're padded by money, but it doesn't change the fact that they're asking for things that can't be done. Right? And so the long and short of that quote, which does not appear on the screen, unfortunately, which probably in hindsight would have been a smart thing to do, basically just says, look, she seemed to be one of the people who was really heavily, hence her title being president of post-production, VFX, and animation. Like, there's a reason, she was obviously heavily involved, and apparently there were instances where, at least in specific instances, and again, we can't generalize because we don't have enough information, But in some instances, there were animators and VFX artists who said, look, she basically wanted them to be like, she would get mad, or she would freeze them out, or she would blacklist them. And we talked about the whole Marvel blacklisting VFX artist things before, I'm sure. And they're also they're overworked and all of this other stuff. And so there was that. I'm sure, I guarantee you that was part of the decision to let her go, not necessarily as necessarily something against her. Maybe it might be. I don't know. I can't confirm or deny why they fired her. But what I can say is, if this is the narrative, if this turns out this was the narrative between a bunch of different VFX companies, then sometimes the only thing you can really do, like, and I'll put it this way, if the three people who had any kind of input on this were Kevin Feige, Victoria Alonso, and one like low-level VFX manager or something, some low-level person who is technically, I guess, has some level of involvement, but is not nearly as prominent within the business as Kevin Feige and Victoria Alonso are. All right, so let's look at that. Then at that point, who are you firing? If you have to make a statement, you have to say, look, we're trying to change the culture here. You can't really fire Kevin Feige, and we'll get to the whole Kevin Feige side of this in a second, but you can't really fire him for very obvious, blatant reasons of he's the guy in charge of everything, right? So what are you supposed to do? Well, you have to fire her. Because you can't, the low-level guy, or girl, or whatever the hell, you can't actually move on from them. Well, you can, I guess, but that doesn't actually say we're trying to change the culture. That just means we're that's a very obvious kind of scapegoat. We don't care. The only way you can really make that move known to those people is by getting rid of one of the people who they believe is, and again, at least based on the reports we know, is the person they believe is highly critical and is very much in charge. Again, obviously this isn't all her, and obviously Kevin Feige definitely has some role to play in this whole thing. But I think that is the thing that you get from that quote, is she seems to be the person who is being made out to be the villain. And again, is it justified? Probably not. But again, unfortunately, business doesn't always work in a very justified way. And we have to kind of just accept that and move on. So, that being said, I think it was deeply unfortunate that she had to go. And I'm sure, almost 1,000% sure, she'll land on her feet somewhere else, because unless something really terrible went on behind the scenes which resulted in this, she'll find if David Zaslav, or whatever hell his name is, can be the CEO of Warner Bros. Discovery, then there is no doubt in my mind that she can end up somewhere in a very high senior position, and probably, as it is already in the process of going somewhere else. Maybe she'll go join, I don't know, she'll go end up somewhere else. Maybe she'll start her own production company. I don't know what she'll do, but whatever she does, I wish her the best of luck, because I'm sure she'll do something great. Now, back to Marvel. Is she the entire problem with VFX? No. Is firing her going to solve anything? Not materially, no. Because at the end of the day, and I'm going to have to keep reminding people of this, the VFX, Marvel is being kind of, and I don't want to say this because I don't want to seem like I'm being charitable toward them, but Marvel is basically being very unfairly burdened with this kind of VFX crisis. The reason for that, and we've actually interviewed 2 VFX artists in our Hollywood in Canada series, so you should definitely check out those 2 with, they tell you about their experiences as VFX, as VFX people, and within that industry, and what kind of work intensity it is. But one of the people, so basically, I've talked to some people, especially the people we've interviewed, and about this kind of on camera and also off camera, and the thing that they've kind of said consistently, everyone I've talked to has said, is, look, this is really the constant workflow for these VFX people, especially those people who are with companies as opposed to independent, is insanely high, and it burns people out, and it is a tedious job. And you know, and it isn't just Marvel, but Marvel does, like, think about Marvel, right? Let's look at Marvel. Marvel relies very heavily on VFX, and unfortunately, if the VFX aren't great, Marvel is going to be blamed heavily. Look at no further than She-Hulk, right? What was the only material criticism leveled at She-Hulk basically up until it started actually airing? It was the VFX are bad, and people expect high quality VFX from Marvel. And so unfortunately, Marvel, if they want to meet the load that they've at least, and I think we've seen kind of them take a step back. They've reduced Kevin Feige said, look, we're reducing the amount of stuff we're releasing. Bob Iger's mused publicly about maybe less sequels and more and this kind of burden, or triquels or whatever you want to call them, that or less trilogies and maybe less fourth movies and fifth movies, and maybe just moving on to new characters, which is partially that, I'm sure, and reduced in if you have less of those old characters, you maybe aren't making those same movies. But obviously, VFX takes so much out of people, and the only real way to solve this is like any problem where people are being taken advantage of in a business, which is a union. And obviously, there have been a lot of talks about VFX unions, and actually, we will talk more about the VFX unions and all that stuff, probably on next week's podcast. Where I will also, by the way, you should definitely check out next week's podcast, because that's where I'll be telling you if I believe that Marvel Studios is in a real crisis right now or not. I won't be doing that here because I need to go into an Aaron Rodgers-like darkness retreat and consider the facts before I decide if I'm going to say Marvel Studios is in a crisis. But I will have that information by the time probably next Monday's podcast. There's going to be a podcast episode on Wednesday too, but that was recorded before. And there's going to be one more that releases next week. So whenever our regular show is in, the big title will be Marvel Studios in crisis ? And that'll also be where. So yeah, you should definitely check that out, and you should subscribe and click the notification bell, because then you'll know when that comes out, and then you'll know if I believe truly Marvel Studios is in a crisis, or if it's just some rocky waters, whatever. Don't worry. Well, do worry and think about it. And let me know in the comments if you think Marvel Studios is currently in a crisis. Anyways, back to the point here that I'm trying to make. So, Kevin Feige is the whole other kind of variable, which I think I mentioned his name like 3 times when I'm talking about Marvel Studios. And so there needs to be some talk here. So, it's funny because I was just fooling around on Twitter. By fooling around, I mean I was just replying to some comments, one of which included, I think someone just said, I think this is just the beginning of shakeups and changes at Marvel Studios, and they're basically getting the fact that there will be more people and that nobody's safe, essentially. And I was like, hey, Kevin's probably safe. Well, I didn't say that. I said Kevin is definitely safe. I said Kevin is safe, implying Kevin Feige is not going anywhere. And I can tell you for a fact, I do not change that opinion. He is not going anywhere. Trust me. And then this was the discussion I want to talk about. So someone, then people were just kind of replying and saying, well, if he decided to leave, and someone was like, oh, not for long, whatever, right? And then someone said, oh, if he decided to leave, and I think that was the key. There's if he decided to leave, because again, he's not getting fired. Who would you want the head of Marvel Studios to be? Jon Favreau, Sam Raimi, or the Russos? Now, gotta break some things down here. And I think I'm going to talk about this because this is like a whole nother bag of worms to jump into. So basically, this is what's going to happen. I can guarantee you this because this is not an unusual thing. Inevitably, and I know this is very scary for some of us, Kevin Feige will retire and will no longer be the CEO of Marvel Studios, or whatever the hell his new position, president and CEO of Marvel Studios, or whatever they call him. He won't be the king anymore. He will retire. It is going to happen one day. Maybe not soon, maybe not for 20 years, but one day, it'll be a very sad day, he will retire. At that point, he will have, and we will know he was going to retire, because basically, you're not putting a director in charge of his doing it. Now, James Gunn could defy the mold but it cannot be. We cannot expect it to be the standard. Why? Because even with the James Gunn situation, guess what? They gave him a business partner. And what I mean by that is someone to handle the business. Because this is the thing people forget. Marvel Studios is not, like, it isn't, yes, passion is involved in it, right? And Kevin Feige is a very unique specimen for a lot of reasons, and specifically because he not only has the passion, but he's also a very smart business person, and he is not, only in it for, like, the ideas. Because you have to have a balance of business decisions and love for the comics, right? Because, and I think you kind of saw a little bit of Kevin Feige getting carried away with the creative fun stuff and a little bit less with the business stuff. And I think you did see a little bit of it backfire. And I think you're getting kind of, when he kind of talked about, okay, look, we got to slow our roll a little bit. We're going to pull back on some of our stuff. That was his way of saying, I got to get back to the business side of things. And I got to, like, actually start paying attention to this stuff again because, we can't fully go off course. We have to still stay relatively consistent, and we have to stay on course. And so that's all well and good, but I think this is the thing. Kevin Feige's business sense and business savvy has been remarkable ever since Iron Man, and obviously as he got more and more involved, he was the steward who brought Marvel Studios into relevance and into the single most profitable franchise ever by a large margin. I don't have the actual. Do I have the table? We can ask, as I'm gonna just take a quick look at the tables. And there it is. Yes. Okay, we're gonna move over to a page. I know it's impromptu, but I had this saved from an episode that's already recorded but isn't out yet. So as you can see here, and I don't even remember the context of this graph, but this graph basically shows the MCU's earnings. I think it's domestic earnings relative to Star Wars, Harry Potter, the DCEU, and Jurassic Park. And I mean, look at the Marvel piece of the pie. That's a very, very big piece of the pie. Marvel is very, very successful. And then, now we're back. But yeah, so basically, I love when I have those, like, graphics kind of just ready and not gone. But yeah, anyways, the point is, Marvel, highly successful franchise. Even Marvel, and Marvel box office, when it's at its weakest between two Avengers movies, is still way more profitable than almost any franchise domestically not named Star Wars. And that was because that was an episode about Star Wars, which is why there's all these graphics which heavily support Star Wars, but they are conveniently working in this context too. Anyways, point is, Marvel is very successful, and despite what people think, and although Ant-Man was actually relatively, and even I thought there were problems with Ant-Man, obviously, but I think the biggest thing here is there needs to be some understanding that, look, Kevin Feige's fine, and he's going to be safe, and that's never changing. And secondly, I think they needed to do something, because I think you were seeing a little bit of staleness, and you're seeing some problems arise, and you're seeing all this stuff, but there was no, you needed to do something to address it, and the only thing you could really do to address it was, fire someone big and important. And they did that, and look, it does feel, it has all the makings, despite the reports and all that stuff, of a sacrificial lamb type sacrifice, right? Of, we're going to do this either to kind of, put everyone back on their toes, or whatever the case may be. Now, I think what will be interesting is, how does Disney as a company kind of, because this is the thing. Bob Iger and Kevin Feige have had this very fascinating relationship, I think, where basically, ever since Kevin Feige kind of, became relatively prominent, and Bob Iger kind of was in that same kind of time of kind of his boom. Weirdly enough, his boom with Disney and Kevin Feige's boom with Marvel happened at the same time, because, obviously the big Disney boom happened because of Marvel. Started because of Marvel, so I think that, obviously because he's always been very pro Feige, and has also been very hands-off Marvel. His comments when he kind of came out and said, this is what we are going to, we want to maybe talk about less sequels for Marvel. I don't know what that means, because it seems like maybe. And he also mentioned things about budgeting for TV shows being reduced. It'll be interesting because he's coming back, or he has come back, I guess. If there might be a little bit more of a hands-on influence on Marvel, because you think about it. When he left Disney, Marvel was coming off Avengers Endgame. A very, very successful movie by box office standpoint. Is there a possibility, and again, there's a lot of factors involved in this, that he might be interested in potentially being a little bit more involved with Marvel Studios on a very, on a more direct level than maybe he would have been prior, where he would give Kevin Feige all this independence. Maybe he now is a little bit more invested, mainly because Marvel Studios is still Disney's most profitable kind of asset, right? Like, again, within, whether it be merchandising, whether it be, box office, whether, honestly, I don't know what the actual theme park split, things are, but I'm almost confident that if you ask people going to Disneyland, why are you here? The vast majority of them would say for Marvel or for Star Wars, right? Like, it's one of their biggest, it is their biggest brand. I think that's probably safe to say. It is also one of the foundational pillars of their entire streaming service. Like, it is essentially what Stranger Things is to Netflix, right? Like, it is that, and I know The Mandalorian technically launched Disney Plus, and Star Wars has kind of become a staple. Marvel is still obviously essential to, like, Star Wars on its own, ask George Lucas, is not enough to sustain a company. And obviously Disney has many facets, but I think everything stems through Marvel, and so I think there is a huge level of kind of commitment to Marvel, and I think it'll be interesting to see if he ends up coming back to it and saying, hey, let's actually, take a look at this thing. Maybe there is something here to talk about. Maybe there is something here to, consider changing. And maybe he won't be. Maybe this is all a lie. But what we do know is that Victoria Alonso firing was definitely a move that was carefully calculated. This is not a reactionary thing. This is not a spur of the moment. I want to fire someone today. I think there have been heavy firings. I think Disney itself is undergoing some changes, cost cutting changes. You can throw in the very outside possibility, and I don't think this has been reported on in any means, and I don't have any other information on that, so I can't even say it, but I'm going to throw it out as a vague possibility, which is, could there be a contract dispute thing going on? Potentially. There's so many possibilities. Like, look, could she have been, could her contract be coming up for renewal and she wanted more money? Possibly. Were there more direct complaints against her, right? Like, we don't know any of that. We don't know. We can't speculate that much because we don't know anything. But it is interesting that she's gone, and it kind of overshadowed what I wanted to talk about today more so, which is just because of the way this conversation kind of unfolded, besides the fact that oh wow, Damon Lindelof has left his Star Wars film, which I didn't even know he had. I guess they were giving everyone Star Wars films, and now they're getting rid of all of them. And also, obviously, the directors of Everything Everywhere All at Once, the Daniels, the Oscar-winning people, are confirmed to be directing Skeleton Crew, or at least one episode of it. We don't know. I don't actually know how many episodes, but at least one. So and I think that was the very positive news of the day, that you obviously get amazing Oscar-winning directors to be directing a Star Wars property. That's like next level, because, again, we will talk more about Star Wars, and actually, if you're really interested in what's happening in the hierarchy of the Star Wars aspect of Disney, then on Wednesday, I have a podcast episode coming out, and we talk about, and I have another temporary co-host for one episode, where we're basically talking about everything related to Star Wars and the new direction they're going. And And so again, you want to subscribe to if you're listening to this on podcast feed, then you want to subscribe to that. If you're watching this on YouTube, then you want to subscribe and hit the bell, because if you're interested in the Disney Star Wars kind of thing that's going on over there, then you want to listen to that, because it'll talk about everything from how the Mandalorian kind of is maybe not great now, to how the Bad Batch is the best Star Wars project ever, and also about all the stuff that's going on over there and who should be in charge of that. Because, I mean, if today's shown me anything, is that I would not be remotely surprised if Kathleen Kennedy is fired. And again, gotta remind everyone, this is not about them being bad people, it's just about the way the business works. And sometimes when someone is not getting the results you want, the only way to make a true change is to, because I think they've had a little DC problem, which I'm not going to spoil too much of what we talk about there, but we do talk a lot about the stuff going on there. So you want to check that out on Wednesday, which will be out Wednesday at 8 a.m. on YouTube and midnight on podcast feeds. So yeah. And don't forget to like, subscribe, comment. What do you think about this firing? Do you think this was a scapegoat thing? Do you think this was like a legitimate firing? Do you think? Yeah, or do you think like she legitimately did something wrong, or do you think there was like this was a scapegoating situation? I do think this seems to be pointing to a scapegoat, but who really knows? We won't know for a while. Eventually it'll come out, but for now we won't know. So anyways, thank you everyone for watching. If you got this far, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share your thoughts. Follow us on social media at comicboys_. On all of the social medias, you can follow me at ColourJamal03 on every social media. And I'll see you all next time on Wednesday for a Star Wars episode, and then on Monday for the answer to the question: is Marvel Studios in a crisis? Okay, bye.